Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for Scientists in Action, Animal Anatomy. My name is Talia. I'm part of the Virtual Experiences team here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and I'm here today with Andie Carrillo, Zoology Preparator. Now, if you've ever been to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, maybe a different museum near where you live or another museum elsewhere in the world, you've probably had the thought before, how do all of the animals that these museums have on display end up there? How do they get there in the first place? What are they used for? And more than anything else, how do we make sure that they don't decompose if they've been there for a very long time? Well, you're in luck. Andie is the person with the answer to all of those questions. And today, we are so excited to get to share those answers and some of Andie's knowledge with you. So in just a few minutes, I will step off and I'll hand things over to her, but I do have just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get going. Number one, I'd like to begin today by respectfully acknowledging that the Denver Museum of Nature and Science is on the traditional lands of the Cheyenne, Ute, Arapaho, and Oceti-Sakowin nations, and that lands across the planet have been stewarded by Indigenous people since time immemorial. I also want to call out that we're currently connected to students from all across the country today, so we have a nationwide audience here at Scientists in Action, and we would love to know where you are watching from. So if you haven't already done so, take a moment to type in the chat and say hi. Let us know where you're watching from today, how many students you have with you or other people are watching with you, and their ages or grades. It's always fun for us to learn a little bit about you. If you're one of our on-camera schools today, please stay muted until we call on you. I'll let you know when it's your turn to ask a question, and when that time comes, we will handle bringing up your video feed so that everybody can see your smiling face. All you need to do is come right up to that microphone and use a nice, loud, and clear voice to ask your question. And students, if you remember, tell us your name. Again, it's always fun for us to learn a little bit about you. If you're one of our view-only schools today, that means that your camera's off, your microphone's off, you can sit back, relax, and watch. But it does also mean that you have access to our Zoom chat. You'll be able to submit your questions through the chat anytime during the program. So if there's something you see, something you want to know about, go ahead and type that there. I'll be watching and we'll pull as many as we can to ask Andie live on camera. So without any further ado, I think that's all I have, and I'm going to pass it over to you. So Andie, how did all these animals end up here? What's your job here at the museum, and what are we doing in this lab?
Yeah, happy to answer those questions. Thanks, Talia. So my name is Andie, and I'm the Zoology Preparator here at the museum, and I am coming to you from the Zoology Prep Lab here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And my job as the Zoology Preparator, I think it's the coolest job at the museum. So I spend my days dissecting animals. So dissection for the purpose of preservation for the research specimens. So preservation of skins, skeletons, parasites, tissues, all kinds of animal materials. And we do that all here in this lab. So we do all of this preparation work in order to help research and scientists in the future and current day. And who knows, maybe one day you'll be a scientist and you'll be able to use all of these research collections too. Before we actually start talking about anything that's on the table today, I do want to give a heads up that we have this collection because we have permits from the state and federal government. So that's why we're able to have all of these specimens that we have here today, and all of the specimens in our collections. So most of our specimens come from wildlife rehabs around the Denver metro area. We work with 8 different rehabs, just animals that were hit by cars, hit windows, maybe they were hurt by cats or dogs, or they hit power lines, lots of different ways that animals can get hurt out in the wild. If they go to a wildlife rehab center and they have a certain break in their wing, or they're too damaged to go back out to its natural habitat, then it can come here and live a second life as a research specimen, and it can live in perpetuity, which means for as long as possible as a research specimen and help scientists in the future and in current day.
That's right. And so it might be a little bit sad to think about how animals might not make it through rehab and rescue and things like that. But I do think it's kind of cool because those animals end up with a sort of second life here at the museum. They get to be an ambassador for their species. They get to help scientists do research. And there's nothing quite like looking at the species that you're studying. And of course, they get to help us teach people like you who've decided to join us today. So before we jump in too much more too, we have one more thing we want to do. We have a poll question that's going to pop up on your screen in just a moment. It's going to ask what you can learn about an animal by studying its body. So what do you think you can learn about an animal by studying its body, looking at its anatomy? So that's going to pop up on your screen any moment now. Looks like it is on there already. So teachers, survey your students and let us know. Do you think that we can learn what it ate? We can learn how it moved? We can learn where it lived? Or is it all of the above? And if you can't vote, we know sometimes people cannot respond to polls depending on what device they're watching on. You can always tell us in the chat. We'll be watching there too. We'll take just a few moments to answer that poll. All right, our studio producer, Tim, is watching, and as we start to get more and more of our group with their responses in, he will go ahead and end that poll. All right, oh man, you all are so brilliant. It looks like 100% of the responses were all of the above. So Andie, tell them why they're right.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, all of the above. So let's start off with talking about what an animal eats. Right here, I have skull of a jackrabbit. So we'll just zoom in real quick. First thing we can tell is that the jackrabbit has these really big incisors, right? And that's gonna help with cutting through leaves and other vegetation so it can eat all of those plants in its natural habitat. And then it has these really cool molars back here. Lots of big molars to grind up that vegetation. So right away, just based on those teeth, we can tell that jackrabbits eat plants. So they are herbivores. I have another example behind me that I'll just very quickly go and grab. Not an herbivore, but a carnivore. You might have heard of this animal. This is an African lion. So carnivores, you can already tell right away that it's a little different than the jackrabbit. It's got these incisors here, so not the two that are paired together, but they're very small compared to the size of the actual skull. And you have these really big canines here, and that's used to puncture meat and rip it away so it can eat the animals that it's hunting, typically antelope or buffalo. And then we have these molars here. So when these teeth back here in the molars meet with the molars on the jaw, it turns into like scissors. So it can shear away at meat pretty easily. So those are just two examples of some differing teeth morphology or anatomy. And teeth is definitely the #1 way that we can look at an animal and see and find out what they eat in their natural habitat. So next, let's talk about movement and locomotion. I'm gonna bring out this really cool specimen here. This is a peregrine falcon. This is actually the fastest animal in the world. Usually when we think about fast animals, we think about cheetahs. Cheetahs have nothing on the peregrine falcon. So peregrine falcons can fly for up to 200 miles an hour. They dive into pigeons, doves, and even some ducks that are about the same size as the peregrine. And they use their really fast speeds to stun the animals that they're trying to hunt. And they need to be super fast in order to do that stun. You can tell that they're really fast by looking at their wings. So their wings are very straight and very pointy at the tips. And that gives us some hints that it's a diving bird. So it dives down really fast to get its prey. In comparison, we can look at another animal that eats other animals. This is a fish-eating animal. This is the wing of a white pelican. So just based on the shape and the size, you can tell it's used for something different. Pelicans soar, and they use the air around them to lift them up into the sky, and then they use the wind to just kind of stay and soar in the sky. So just based on looking at these wings side by side, you can see that there's a difference in the shape and in the feathers, and that gives us some hints on how the birds, specifically the pelican and the falcon, differ in their movement. And then lastly, I want to talk about habitat. We got two really cool rabbits here. First one we have is the black-tailed jackrabbit. So black-tailed jackrabbit, right away you can tell it looks like this nice brown coloration with a little bit of tan, some highlights in there. This is perfect for camouflage in its natural habitat, which is prairies and deserts. So right away you can see it would match in perfectly with that habitat. It could hide really well in the brush in the prairie. It blends in really well to sandy areas in the desert. When we look at a relative of the black-tailed jackrabbit, which I have behind me, this is the white-tailed jackrabbit. So they're in the same genus, but different species, so very closely related. Right away, you can tell that the coloration is super different. So this white-tailed jackrabbit is really white because it lives in areas where it snows. So that's why it needs to have a different coloration or pelage color. The really cool thing about white-tailed jackrabbits is that they'll actually change colors throughout the season. So in the summertime, when there's no snow on the ground, they'll turn into a brown color similar to the black-tailed jackrabbit. And then in the wintertime, they'll shed their fur and they'll turn into this beautiful white coloration to blend into the snow. So just by seeing those two together, they're very closely related, but they're very different in appearance. And I want to come back and look at this black-tailed jackrabbit again. So we saw the skull earlier and its teeth that are perfect for eating vegetation. We saw the coloration that makes it perfect for camouflaging in its environment so its predators don't see it so easily. And then we can also see that there's some really long legs on this jackrabbit, so hind legs and forelegs. And those legs are connected to really strong muscles. So that makes the rabbit really, really fast. So even if a predator does see it, it can run away really fast and hopefully get away. All of these traits are perfect for its environment of deserts and prairies. And those traits allow it to survive for a really long time in its habitat and pass on its genetics to the next generations. And that's what we call biological fitness. So it's not just fitness isn't just being the strongest and the fastest, right? It all depends on the habitat that the animal is in and what it's adapted to. So for example, if we put this black-tailed jackrabbit up at the tip top of a mountain, it would no longer be fit for the environment because maybe the coloration doesn't allow it to camouflage. Maybe it won't have the space to run as fast as it could in the prairie or in the desert. And it might not be able to eat the same vegetation that it was used to eating. So just because an animal is made perfectly for its natural environment doesn't mean that it's going to be the most fit everywhere else. Sometimes you get some really weird adaptations that don't make sense to us humans, but it makes sense for those animals.
We'll talk a lot more about that in a little bit.
We sure will.
Good stuff coming up. Yeah, the thing that stands out to me here is like you could take that black-tailed jackrabbit and you could put it in the white-tailed jackrabbit's habitat, and it still wouldn't be the most fit for that environment. It would still be less fit than it is in its natural habitat just because maybe it wouldn't camouflage as well. Its predators would see it like right away. I think that's pretty amazing. All right, is there anything else you'd like to add before we move into taking some questions?
I mean, we're going to take a look at some really cool specimens later on after these questions. So very different from the jackrabbit, but I think we'll start with some questions before we do that.
That's right. Okay, so it looks like we have got one group on camera with us so far today. So we're going to start by taking 2 questions from Henry Elementary School. That's Ms. White's group. They are down in Colorado Springs, so just a little ways south of us. And after that, we will pull some questions from the chat. So if there's anything that you're wondering, you can pop that in the chat. You can ask Andie what she likes to eat for breakfast or do for fun on the weekends. You can say, what's that cool thing on the table behind you? I want to look at that some more. We have gotten all kinds of questions throughout our broadcast today, and we would love to answer whatever you'd like to know. So Ms. White's group, looks like you got a student at the screen. We'll go ahead and spotlight your feet. There we go.
How do an animal brain have different sizes?
I caught how do. Could you tell me the rest of the question one more time?
So she asked how or like why do animals have different brain sizes? Or did you want to talk about the different parts of the brain?
How do they have different sizes?
So she's wondering why some animals have different brain sizes than other animals.
Great question. That is a fabulous one.
Yeah, that is a really good one. So there's a lot of different factors that go into brain size. One is just the size of the animal, right? So a whale brain might be really small for its size, but it's still going to be way bigger than a human brain, right? Just because whales are so big. Other things that go into it, it's brains, the size of brains has been linked to intelligence. So animals that have larger brains might be able to identify themselves in a mirror or use tools. So think like primates, like humans and gorillas and chimpanzees. But there's some really smart animals that have pretty small brains too. So birds are very, very intelligent, especially birds like ravens and crows. They've been known to use tools, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a bigger brain. It's just that their brain functions a little differently. So, you know, there's some correlation between brain size and intelligence, but it doesn't always work out the same for every single animal.
Interesting. And not every animal needs a huge brain to be fit for their environment.
No, intelligence does not mean that you're going to do better in your environment.
Awesome. Let's grab one more from Henry Elementary School, and then we'll take some from the chat. We may come back to Henry in a little bit too.
What's your question?
How come some animals have larger claws than others?
Did you hear that?
Not sure. I'm not sure I caught it. Can you ask a little louder?
You want to ask again?
Why do some animals have bigger claws than other animals?
I'm going to need you to repeat that one for me. Thank you so much.
So she asked, why do some animals have bigger claws than other animals?
Got it. Thank you so much for your persistence with the questions. In this lab, there are a lot of loud pieces of equipment that make it difficult for us to hear through our earpieces. So thank you for sticking with us. Claws, Andie.
Claws, yeah, claws are great. So it depends on what the animal needs their claws for, right? Like we don't have claws, but our nails aren't very long because we don't really need them to be long. But for animals that like dig in the ground, they might need some really big claws. So if you think like anteaters have really big claws, some bears have really big claws. They use those to dig in the ground. So digging dens or digging for food. Other reasons why we can have big claws is for protection. So things like what are they called? The little round dudes with all the scales.
Armadillos?
Armadillos, there it goes. So armadillos have little claws. They use them for digging, but they can also, the larger species of armadillos can use them for warding off predators as well. So they have those defenses and they have the claws. But yeah, that's a great question.
We'll talk about another creature with some big claws in a little bit. More
I didn't want to
claws.
bring it up just
No,
yet.
not yet. We'll just keep leaving you all on a cliffhanger there. There's more to talk about in a few minutes about claws. Awesome. Thank you so much for those questions, Henry Elementary. I do see some from the chat. You all are welcome to continue putting questions in the chat throughout the entire program, and we will answer as many as we possibly can. So one that I saw come in from Fremont Elementary School in Colorado Springs, they're wondering about those jackrabbit legs that you talked about, and how long are they specifically?
Oh yeah. So let me pull out one of the jackrabbits. So when you prepare study skin, sometimes a little bit of the leg can stay within the body of the study skin, but the leg would be, so the knee starts around, let me make that better, starts around here, and then it goes all the way out there. So you still have a femur left that gets attached to the hip. So they can have pretty long legs, and attached to those legs are really big muscles, especially on the thighs, and like connecting to the pelvis, because that's what gives the rabbits all of their speed and the power behind their speed. Yeah, so you can see a picture going up on your feed right now. That is what a live black-tailed jackrabbit looks like. And you can see just how long those legs are, and you can see the knee there and all the muscle that's attached to that leg. Yeah, good question.
Primed for speed. That was a very good question. Let's grab a couple more. Oh, this is a question that I know you get all the time when you talk about this stuff, Andie, and it gets asked a lot for a very good reason. We have one group that's wondering, this is from Morelands Elementary School in Kenmore, Washington. Are the animals real? Are the ones behind you real? Now, what does real mean in this context?
In this context, it means, was the animal alive in the past? Which, yes, all of the animals that you see behind me, they were alive at some point. So yes, everything that we have in our collection was alive at some point. We use our collection for research. So in order to be able to research those animals, we need to have those records of actual animals that were alive at some point. So, yep, all of them were alive. They are real.
Good question. And another question that I think goes along with that one nicely is, so how do you preserve these animals for research? If they were alive, and we know that after a living thing dies, it tends to decompose. So how do you get in the way of that process?
Yeah, so when an animal comes to this lab, it's already dead. And from there, the process is actually pretty simple. So what we do, let me get the rabbit again, just to show you more or less the locations of incisions and all that. So I would cut a line down the belly here, and then from there, you just skin from the belly out. So go from the belly to the legs and tail, up the back, and then all the head. So this one here was preserved just by air. There's no chemicals used in this type of preparation. It's just, we got a couple bones left on the feet. Everything else has been skinned out. There's no muscle left. There's hardly any bones left. There's no organs, and it's just been stuffed with cotton. And then after a while, you can pin those out, and it'll just continue to stay in that form throughout the whole rest of its life as a specimen. Another thing that we use is hay. We use those for bigger animals. This is what our hay looks like right there. It's just hay from an aspen tree, and this is the type of preservation method that's been used for over 100 years. So it hasn't changed all that much. And sometimes we do use some chemicals in animals that have really fleshy bits like noses or paws. We use something called formalin, which is just a diluted form of formaldehyde. So that's really the only chemical we use to stop the decomposition process. Everything else is just air dried.
You also have a jar
I
of
do.
very interesting things on that table. That's another way of preserving things.
Yep. I have a jar of ethanol with a bunch of little shrews in there. So this is another preservation method. We can do what's called a wet preservation. So in this jar are a bunch of shrews that their organs are gone and they're stuffed with cotton, but they still have all of their skeleton. They still have all of their muscles. So if someone wants to study shrew muscles or shrew skeletons, they can do so using these shrews. Yeah, so lots of different methods.
Lots of different methods. And yeah, it all kind of depends on what that specimen is going to be needed for and how we're going to store it. Great question. Another one that I think goes along with that one really nicely, this one comes from our friends at Henry Elementary School. They're wondering why some of the animals have white eyes and some of the animals have black or more realistic looking eyes. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we look at the snow leopard, right? Those eyes on the snow leopard, those are glass. So taxidermy is a little bit different from what I do on my day-to-day, where the purpose is to make it look like it's alive, kind of. So pose it in a very realistic pose and give it some eyes and paint a little nose so it can look like it's a real snow leopard in the room with you. For the work that I do, we don't really need to do the glass eyes. You know, we're preserving these to stay in a collection to be used for research, so we don't need to go for the most realistic pose. Instead, we can have these all laying flat on their bellies or on their back, and they will sit in a cabinet until someone needs them for their research.
So that's actually the cotton in the eye socket, right?
Yes, this is the cotton that we use to stuff the whole body coming out of the eyes.
Good question. Yeah, good observation too. We love seeing that you all are paying attention to what's going on in the background. Let's take a couple more questions and then we will move on to some of that exciting content that we've been teasing for you, claws and other things. It's going to be great. I think this one might be referring to the snow leopard. They might be looking at the cat that's in the back of the room. But maybe you can talk about the other cat that they mentioned. This group is wondering, can you tell where the cheetah lived by some of its special features? So maybe we can talk about the snow leopard because the snow leopard is here in the room with us, but maybe you can also talk about what we can tell about cheetahs.
Yeah, so we can compare the snow leopard and the cheetah a little bit. So if we take a look at the snow leopard, it has some pretty short legs. Usually when animals like the snow leopard live in the snow, as the name says, they tend to have shorter limbs, because when you have shorter limbs, that means that your arms aren't out and exposed to the environment. Versus the cheetah that lives in really hot environments, they have really, really long legs. So that helps them with getting heat out of their body. When they're getting too warm, they can just kind of like splay out and stretch out, and all of that heat can come out through their legs. And then another really cool thing that's very different between the two is, since snow leopards live in very cold environments, they have very, very dense fur. And compare that to the cheetah, not really dense at all, because they live in very hot environments. So those little details, we can look at those and we can infer or determine where an animal lives based on those tiny details.
Very cool. Yeah, anatomy holds the clues to a lot of features of these animals.
It does.
One last one before we move on. Another really observant group. I love how many of you are just noticing things happening around the room and seeing things behind Andie, and you want to know what they are. One group is asking, what are all those tubes behind you?
Those tubes, oh yeah, that's a good question. So those tubes make sure that we don't have a whole lot of stink in the lab, and I can move over so you can zoom in. But those are called snorkels, and when we have something that's really, really stinky, we can prep them under a snorkel, and then all the smell, instead of going into my face, it goes out of the museum through those tubes and onto the roof, where no one should be smelling it. I always wonder, what if there's someone working on the roof and they smell all the stuff, but I've never had any complaints, so I think it's okay.
Would you like to tell your skunk story?
I can tell my skunk story. So the last time I prepared a skunk here, it ended up stinking up the whole museum, because somehow the stink from the skunk went up into the roof, and it was so stinky that the wind carried it over to where we get the air to ventilate throughout the museum, and it stunk up some of the offices. So there was a whole deal that went on where I had to stop skinning the skunk, and someone came in and they were like, oh my goodness, the skunk is getting the stink everywhere. So I had to stop and prep it and finish it some other time. But it was pretty fun. I think it was a great time. I think some people didn't enjoy it, which is understandable, but I had a great time prepping the skunk. That just happens when you have a lab like this in the museum.
I like that story because I think it just really illustrates one of the most unique aspects of your job. I think any job you do is going to have some interesting stories about the things that you might encounter, but that's just such a unique one. I like it when you tell it. I remember the skunk day. I don't actually remember the stink. I just remember that it happened. Maybe my brain has blocked it out. Okay. So earlier in this program, we talked about jackrabbits a lot and some other examples of how you can learn about an animal by looking at its body parts. And we specifically talked about fast animals. We talked about jackrabbits, we talked about peregrine falcons. And it's easy to think that that is what fit means, right? Being fast and strong is what makes an animal fit for its environment. But Andie, is faster always better?
No, it is not. Faster is not always better. It really depends on your environment, your habitat, and then an animal's role in that habitat. So I'm going to pull out a specimen that's very, very special specimen today. It's probably the ambassador of slowness.
Maybe you can guess what we're about to pull out in the chat.
I would consider it the ambassador of slowness. There's a lot of slow animals out there, but I think this one is the most well-known for being slow. Right. So this is a two-toed sloth. So sloths of all species of sloths live in Central America and South America. And they all have these really cool, I'm going to flip them over real quick, these really cool claws. So the two-toed sloth has two claws on its front feet, and then the three-toed sloth has three claws on its front feet. And those are used to hang on to branches at the tops of the canopies of tropical rainforests. So they hang out up there on the canopies, just hanging onto branches, you know, living their life up there. Once in a while, they'll come down, but for the most part, they're up on the trees, hanging onto branches, upside down, having a great time living up there. And I think we have a poll for all of you to see what you want to learn about the sloth next.
That's right. So we'll take a closer look at one feature of the sloth, and we want you to pick what that's going to be. So that poll is going to pop up on the screen any moment now. And again, if you cannot vote in the poll, just tell us in the chat what you think. Which trait of the sloth would you like to learn more about? Do you want to learn about how it moved? Do you want to learn how it pooped? You can vote for that. We can talk about poop. Poop is science.
It's a good category.
It really is. Do you want to learn about its fur, or do you want to learn about its muscles? So tell us what sounds most interesting to you today. We will go by the winner of this poll. So we'll leave that open for just a few moments while you get your responses in. Take just a few more seconds. Our studio producer, Tim, is watching, and he will wrap up that poll when it looks like most of us have voted. I know we have a lot of people watching today, so take a moment. All right. We're going to go ahead and go with Andie's choice here. I see a tie. So Andie,
Oh,
what do you want?
What's the tie?
Let's go between poop and fur.
Okay. I think I'm going to talk about the poop.
It's what I would pick too.
Yeah, it's a very good category. So sloths have really interesting needs for when they have to poop. So like I said, sloths live up in the canopy. They're climbing around up there. When they need to go to the bathroom, they have to climb down. So for two-toed sloths, they climb down head first down a tree. For three-toed sloths, they climb butt first down the tree. We don't know why. That's just a differentiation between them. So they always climb down the same tree, and they poop at the base of the same tree every single time. And I think the most wild part of this whole poop story is that sloths only poop about once a month. So they build up a lot of waste in their system. So when they actually get down to pooping, they can lose up to 30% of their body mass just in one poop. That's really heavy.
That is kind of unbelievable to me. Like, can you imagine if you only pooped one time a month?
One time a month.
One time. That would be, and if it was 30% of your body weight, that is pretty unbelievable. It's hard to fathom what that's like. So yes, sloths poop 30% of their body weight.
Yes, and that is my sloth poop fact of the day.
That is your sloth poop fact. Fantastic. Well, let's go ahead, and because we still have some time, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So if anyone's got some more, go ahead and put them in. I want you to talk about fur too. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, so you can see in its little face of this sloth, it has some greeniness to it. That's not rot, that's not anything bad. That's just some remnants of algae that was growing on the sloth's fur. So algae and sloths have what's called a symbiotic relationship. So a relationship where both individuals benefit. So the algae benefits by having a home on the sloth's fur, and then the sloth benefits by getting a little bit of camouflage from that algae. And also, they've been known to snack on the algae every so often. Algae has a good source of protein, so whenever they're lacking some nutrients, they can just lick off the algae off their fur, and it's like a little snack. And their fur is specially designed. It has little grooves, little microscopic grooves, so the algae can hang on in there and they can live together in the treetop canopy.
Man, I wish I could grow a snack.
Yeah,
How nice
awesome.
would that be? Don't ever have to go to the grocery store again. I just grow a snack on my hair.
It'd be so cool.
That sounds really cool. We do actually have a couple of questions about sloths if you want to take those now. I see one question from Hunter Stoltzfus's group. They're wondering, do sloths have different colors like the different kinds of rabbits? What a great question.
That is a great question. So we talked about the green that the algae can provide on the fur. So that's one variation. Some of them are more green than others. And they don't really change colors like the jackrabbits do. So the wild-tailed jackrabbits, they change color throughout the season depending on how snowy it is outside, whether it's winter or summer. Sloths do not do that. The Amazon and the tropical rainforest stay pretty consistent throughout the year. The closer you get to the equator, so where these guys live, the less variation you have in weather. So there's not really like a cold season and a hot season. It stays pretty consistent. So they don't really have to do all of that. But there's always going to be individual variation, just like with people. Some people have blonde hair, some people have brown hair, and there's different shades between there. Same thing happens with animals. If I pulled all of our jackrabbits out or all of our sloths out, you'd be able to see that individually they would still look a little bit different. And that's just, that's just how it is. It's genetics. We're not all genetically the same, so we're not all always going to look the same.
Very good. I see two questions from this classroom, and thank you to that question from Eagleside Elementary. This is another group from Eagleside. They're wondering, how tall can sloths get, or maybe how long can they get, and also how long can they live?
Ooh, that's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know their lifespan at all, but they are very slow moving animals. So usually animals that have a really low metabolism can live a little bit longer, but I don't know the exact numbers for a sloth. And lengthwise, I can't really give you a measurement, but I do know that they're one of the larger plant eaters that you can find in the Amazon, at least up in the trees and the canopies. They can actually stay up in the canopies for, they can go pretty high up on some thin branches because they're so lightweight. But I can't give you any exact answers. Sorry about that.
That's all right. You stumped the scientists, is what you all did with that question. That's pretty awesome. That just means we have some more research to do. Andie has some learning to do about sloths.
Yeah.
And maybe you all can do some research about that too. That's great. I see a couple more questions about sloths. And then I see another one that'll take us in a slightly different direction, but a direction I like. This same group, Nicole Mullis's group at Eagleside, is wondering, how long can sloths live? Oh no, we just talked about that one. I'm so sorry. I got confused with another one. They're wondering, this same group is wondering, do sloths shed their fur?
Do sloths shed their fur?
Are they like dogs? Because my dog is shedding right now. Oh, man.
I don't know the exact answer, but I imagine not, right? So the reason why dogs have different fur, like coats, is because they're getting ready for the winter time. And we talked about how the Amazon's weather stays pretty consistent. So when you have that consistency, you don't really have to change up your fur or feathers based on the weather, right?
That's that makes sense. Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it's a really good observation, right? Because again, there's this relationship between what the conditions of your environment are like and what your body needs to do, right? So yeah, if your environment changes a lot, and in summer the vegetation is brown, but in winter it's covered in snow, you got to change colors between the season. And if it gets warmer and cooler, you got to get a thick coat and a thin coat. But if you live in a place like a rainforest where things are the same all the time, don't got to change.
Don't have to.
That's part of what makes a sloth fit for its environment.
Right.
Awesome. Right. This question takes us to a slightly different direction, but I like it a lot. What is the fastest animal in the ocean, and what are its adaptations to make it so fast?
Ooh, that's a good
Do you know
question.
your marine biology?
I am not a marine biologist. I am not an ichthyologist, so a person that studies fish. But I believe one of the fastest is the marlin. So marlin are swordfish. You might have seen some of those nature documentaries or something like that. But they are not as fast as the peregrine falcon. Remember, peregrine falcon is the fastest in the world, and that's 200 miles an hour. But they're about the speed of a cheetah, so around 60, 70 miles an hour. So I don't know if it's exactly the fastest, but it's pretty up there in terms of fast fish.
One thing I will add is that a lot of marine animals, if you look at them, even if they're not closely related at all, they have a very similar body shape, right? They're all sort of like bullet-shaped or torpedo-shaped little creatures, like penguins and seals have similar body types to fish. And that again is all about what's most fit for their
Right.
environment.
And those might not even be too fast on land, but they're really fast in the water. So where their prey is, they get to be really, really fast. When they're up on land, they don't really have to be fast because there's no prey up there.
I like it. I see another question back to sloths. They're wondering what makes sloths so slow. It's a great
That's
question.
a good question. So I can bring out the sloth again just so you can have a beautiful sloth to look at while I'm talking to you about metabolism, which I know is very exciting. But so when we think about sloths, we have to think about what they eat, right? And sloths are eating leaves from trees, and leaves don't have a high nutritional value. So when we don't have food that has high nutritional value, we need to take the time to absorb all those nutrients. So it has a really long digestive tract. So it then turns into a very slow digestive tract. And because it can't absorb all of those nutrients, just like we can't absorb every single nutrient that we get from our food, it still doesn't get enough nutrients to be able to run and jump and do all these energetic things. So its body has adapted to live a slow life. So because of that nutrient poor diet, it then has to get a slower metabolism, so it doesn't use up all of its energy in just a few hours. It needs to be able to last for a really long time on really poor quality food. And we see this happening in other species as well. So if you think about koalas, all they eat are eucalyptus, and they also live really slow lives. And it's for the same reason. They have very low nutrient foods, so they just have to live a little slower because their energy needs are, they still have energy needs, but their food is not super good quality.
I was going to say that makes me think of koalas and how all they eat is leaves, and then they snooze all day long. All right, well, looking at the time, I think we have time for one more quick thing. And Andie, I'm actually going to come up with a question this time because I think it's a fun one. Is there anything on the table behind you that you haven't showed off to us yet that you'd really like to? We've got some cool stuff in here.
Yes, I do. And Talia knows that I want to show this off, which is why she's asking this question.
That is correct.
I got to pick it up really, really slowly. So this is another example of a very slow animal. Not as slow as the sloth, but pretty slow. This is a North American porcupine. So instead of, these live up in trees, they eat bark. So again, another nutrient poor food. But in order to get away from predators, I'm showing you the backside of it because you can see all of these quills. So the quills are just modified hairs, but they are very, very spiky. And I have to make sure to only hold it on its belly because if not, it will poke me. But this is just one other example of how really slow animals deter predators, and they keep themselves alive in the wild and increase their fitness so that they can pass on their genetics to the next generations.
Fabulous. Well, with that, I'm going to not come onto camera yet so that you can put the porcupine back.
I will put this away.
Without a collision. That would make me very sad. We do just want to say a huge thank you to all of our students who are on with us today for their really insightful and thoughtful questions. Again, it's always so cool for us to get to know what you all are excited about, and it made me really happy to hear you making connections, observing what was going on behind us and saying, what actually is that? So that was the coolest thing in the world for us. So thanks for taking the time to hang out, ask your questions, and learn along with us. And we hope to do a lot more of that with you in 2022. So we have a whole exciting lineup of broadcasts kicking off next year in January. We'll take a virtual voyage through the universe using fancy planetarium software. You get to choose the destinations that we head to. We'll explore a lot more in the spring as well, more to come after the new year. So teachers, watch your inboxes. We'll be excited to share some more news with you and share how to get registered. On-camera groups, please feel free to unmute and say goodbye. We hope that you have a great end of your semester. We were so happy to have you on with us today. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay curious, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.